Good afternoon from Southern Oregon.
Hello.
My name is Nathan Farrington. I'm from the bass section of the Britt Festival Orchestra, and I'm here today with Gabe Kahane. We have a concert tonight, 7:30, at the North Medford High School. Tickets at the door, $20 for adults, $10 for students.
Children and animals, also $10.
Absolutely, service dogs are welcome. We're here to talk about, I think that we should focus our conversation today in the presence of Gabe's new work, which is receiving its second performance.
That's correct.
Second performance. I think first we should say thank you. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for trekking from venue to venue. It's been a tough week at Britt with the presence of these fires. We've been sort of out and about and relocated from our place on the hill. But in the presence of these sort of variables that have popped up totally outside of your control, I wanted to talk about that as a composer and all of the variables that are ingredient in bringing your work to the public, and what your attitude is about that, and how you sort of handle the notion that at a certain point a lot is outside of your control, and that's I'm sure can be part of the beauty, but can also be part of the frustration in a process like this.
I think that, one of the things that one has to become comfortable with as a composer is this idea that there are always variables outside one's control, and that every performance is going to be a little bit different. There are things that will be transcendent in one performance, where at the same time, little things will go awry, and other times you'll have a performance that on its surface is incredibly smooth, but perhaps lacks a certain kind of energy that you want. I would also say that sometimes adverse circumstances can create a kind of electricity in a performance that's that comes out of that adversity, and I think we might be in one of those situations today.
When you mention the notion of achieving something that you want, or how do you develop a set of aspirations around a new work? What is your process in terms of a message or goals inside of this experience? For me, there's a lot of research. Sure. I think that almost all the projects that I undertake involve, in the case of this work, I was asked to tackle housing insecurity and homelessness, and for me, that led me to a broader inquiry into the resurgence of deep poverty, really coming to understand that homelessness is but one node on a spectrum of how poverty is endemic in our country. We're at a moment where 43% of American families can't afford a basic budget, that includes rent, healthcare, food. I think that for me, it starts with a single emotional impulse or a single intellectual impulse, and then from there it sort of flowers out. I start maybe with a book. Sometimes, in the case of this piece, it was a lot of interviews. It was volunteering at a homeless shelter. It was reading, tax policy history in this country. It was reading about housing policy. It was reading about public housing, reading about housing discrimination. Did you find that it influenced the process, made the musical side of the working any different? Was it easier or harder to write, sort of edified with all of that information, or?
I think that for a lot of my projects, there is this sort of tipping point that occurs where it's research, reading, taking notes, conducting interviews, what have you, and then at a certain point, the scale tips, and that's sort of the ineffable part, is like when has there been enough research? When is it time to start writing the music? And in this instance, a previous project had kind of spilled over into the time that I had devoted to this one, and so I was writing really kind of under duress, doing the research, starting to sketch musical ideas, and it got a little bit messier, where I had been writing music for maybe 10 days when I came up with this idea to actually use an emergency shelter intake form as the basis for the libretto. And so it was then about kind of corralling some material that I had already written into that structure, throwing away some material I had written that didn't really fit into that form, and then expanding upon that text.
So literally, to some extent, corralling, these words into your work. You're working with two other singers a lot of times throughout this piece. What was your idea in terms of sort of making the narrator a sort of multi-voiced experience?
Yeah, I think, initially I had imagined Misha inhabiting a whole bunch of different characters, and that, she was going to be a real estate developer, and then she was going to be a mortgage broker, and then she was going to be a social worker. But I found that was going to feel kind of episodic and modular and not really have a sense of direction. And so when I happened upon the idea for the form, I thought, oh, this is interesting. Misha's character is to be this form, but then there are these kind of lyrical passages in the text that sneak in, some of which come from interviews, lightly paraphrased from interviews that I did with people who've experienced homelessness, housing insecurity, other times just from my own imagination or from other research that I had done. But then there was this other consideration, which is, writing about poverty can lead to a kind of emotionally monochromatic plane, and I wanted to make sure that there was some levity, and because there is not a ton of ethical ambiguity in terms of how we arrived at this situation. It's a series of policy failures over 40 years, and kind of, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you're on, we can see how we've arrived at this moment. Now, we don't have to agree that housing is a right. Some people may believe that it's a privilege. I happen to believe that it should be a right, that the constitutional notion of the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that means that you should have a roof over your head. But art generally, to me, thrives on ambiguity, as I think the piece says. And so in order to try to find some more colors, I introduced this chorus, who are this kind of cheeky, sardonic, biting, acerbic group who kind of come in. They're called the Chorus of Inconvenient Statistics, and they sort of pour cold water on the proceedings.
Sure. Well, as somebody who's sort of newly discovering the work from the bass section, I think it is important to note that you have somehow taken a huge subject, condensed it down into 40 minutes, which sounds like not very much time, but actually in terms of an orchestral work, that's an orchestral work of some real breadth.
It's actually 52 minutes.
Is it 52?
Yeah.
Well, my point is that I've been struck by a sort of seamless involvement of many different tones. I mean, there's a movement that reminds me of certainly Broadway, and even more specifically, maybe even something from like the South Park musical, in the middle of this thing that helps keep everyone feeling fresh during a tough subject study. And I also think it's worth noting that you did a wonderful job of folding your own voice into this thing without putting yourself in a spotlight in the front. It's neat, sort of in the tradition maybe of like, Mozart playing the viola,
Yeah, that was not intended. I mean, the idea for this trio came so late in the writing process and so close to the premiere that I thought, just in the interest of having fewer variables, well, and I also, from a practical standpoint, I was asking the Britt Festival and the Oregon Symphony to hire 3 more singers.
Yes.
And so I said, you know what, I'll come sing and you don't have to pay me. Sure. Just hire these 2 other singers, and that's a good compromise.
Yes.
But I really like the way you framed that. I mean, I kind of love being in this supporting role and having this sort of one cameo moment where I step out and deliver some hard truths in that movement. Well,
also from a practical standpoint, it offers the orchestra a chance to receive your commentary. I feel like you've done a wonderful job of sort of overseeing from out in the audience and also leading from the stage as you lead the trio. It's been an amazing experience to tackle such hard subject matter, frankly, and I think it's neat when the musical side can be high art and the message can be really in the moment. It's a hard thing to do. I also think it's wonderful. We should note that part of what I would consider the climax of the piece is a chorale that involves sort of unheard voices from the community.
Yeah.
A group of people perhaps singing for the first time with an ensemble this way. What were you thinking?
Yeah, so for this performance, we've partnered with Rogue Retreat and the Rogue Valley Peace Choir, and Rogue Retreat serves this community in terms of creating stability in housing, and also I think dealing with substance abuse issues. And it was really important to me. One of the things that I wrestled with the most in writing this piece is the question of, is this for the institution to make itself feel better about being an elite institution that serves an elite audience, or is it actually going to create difference for a community? And so both in Portland and here, we reached out to try to, we talk about, voices that are not heard. And in this piece, I've tried to create this space in which those voices are literally heard. They have the final word in the piece. They sing the last movement. And I don't know that solves any grand, economic, ethical, societal problems, but it feels like it's a step toward breaking down these barriers. And I spoke earlier about this idea that homelessness is but one node on a spectrum of how poverty is experienced in this country. And a lot of poverty in this country is experienced in invisible ways. There are folks who are, as far as the government is concerned, considered homeless, who nevertheless are living doubled up with family. They're living in motels, they're living in shelters. And those people we tend not to see, and I think that's a more insidious form of poverty, in part because we end up with a skewed perspective of what the experience of homelessness is, because we see people on the street who represent actually a very small portion of those who are considered homeless. And so bringing in the voices of some of the folks who are singing tonight and some of the folks who sang in Portland have experienced street homelessness, but by and large, it's been for these people, and I can't speak as much to Rogue Retreat's folks because I haven't had a chance to speak to them in as great depth, but certainly in Portland, it was very much those people who are constantly making choices between paying the rent, paying the electricity bill, paying for groceries, paying for prescriptions. And I think that what's important to me about highlighting that kind of poverty is how proximate it is to those of us who think that we could never end up that way.
Yes.
When in fact, we might be one medical emergency away, or a car accident away from ending up in that situation, or losing a job, or the housing market tanking and our house going into foreclosure. All of these things, as they did during the financial crisis 10 years ago, lead to 9 million people losing their homes. Some of them were able to find respite in one way or another, and others experienced bouts of homelessness. And so that's why it's so important to me that this community chorus is featured in the piece. Well,
tonight is a unique opportunity with a group of musicians who have literally come from across the country into a situation full of uncertainty in terms of the fires that exist here, and have chosen to sort of strive to deliver a message here. And while it's never, I think, our responsibility as the message deliverers to make decisions about what it will mean to others. Yeah. I think that there's a unique opportunity here to come to North Medford High School to experience a wide variety of musical styles and ideas while becoming educated about an extraordinarily important situation in the country that influences many people that we know. So I think it should be a great opportunity, and we hope that you'll come avail yourself of a chance to join us in a really interesting setting for a really interesting musical moment. And we're looking forward to tonight's performance. Thank you so much for speaking.
It's my pleasure, Nate. Yes. Yeah, thanks again.